Good morning. It's great to be here with you all and to take time and praise and worship together. Even if it is a little bit smoky outside, it's great to be with and to see everybody here this morning. You know, I was reflecting this last week that this coming week, the girls are going to be turning 16 months, which really doesn't seem possible to me. I mean, I remember when we became suspicious that maybe there were two babies there, and we decided to go and have an ultrasound. And I remember what the text said is she thought she was almost done. There's two in there. She wasn't supposed to tell us that. That was supposed to be in the report. But it was fun to confirm Alyssa's suspicion. Of course, that meant my suspicions that we were having a velociraptor were dashed. But, you know, I love my girls. I'm grateful for having them. As you can see, the toy that I ruined, that's now a duck call, that was supposed to be a sorter, is up there as well. You know, it's been fun having the girls and watching them grow up. And despite the fact that there's a lot of similarities between them, there's a lot of differences between the girls. Sylvie has curly, reddish hair, and Sylvie has straight brown hair, and Sylvie's kind of a go-getter, have fun, adventurous, and Susanna's a little bit more reserved. I'm going to have to get my names straight, like all day. There's so many names I have to keep straight. But there's a lot of differences between them, you know, and it's a lot of work having twins. You know, you got to chase this one down for a diaper, and then you got to chase that one down. And my personal favorite, this one wakes up, and then that one wakes up. Right? And then you have two screaming babies that you have to rock back to sleep, and that just doesn't work well. And because of that, really it takes like two people to take care of the girls a lot of the time. And for that reason, I'm very grateful for having Dana help us out during all of this time, as we've kind of gotten them, you know, over a lot of the major hurdles in their development, and a lot to come. But this has got me thinking about a Bible story. Rebecca and Isaac were having twins, and back then, you know, they didn't have ultrasounds. So Rebecca's like, you know, what's going on? And Alyssa said, you know, I really relate to that. She's like, what's going on? You know, so God's like, you know, you got twins. And she's like, okay, but why is this happening to me? Well, there's two nations within your womb. The older is going to be stronger. One will be stronger than the other, and the younger will rule over the older. The older will serve the younger. And this begins a lifelong feud between these brothers as Jacob and Esau are born. And you know, one comes out red and hairy. That's Esau. And then the other one comes out apparently not red-headed, and not as hairy, apparently bald and, I don't know, brown hair, blonde hair, we don't know. But these two brothers become very different. And as a twin father now, there's just a little bit of sympathy, I guess, for the way that Rebecca and Isaac acted. Because I can imagine one parent taking one child a lot of the time, and the other child taking the other a lot of the time, and because of that, there's a favoritism that develops within the household. Now, we're very intentional about making sure that we're switching babies around, but I can see how that would happen. So, I'm telling you, I'm going to have to keep names straight today. Esau becomes the favorite of his father. You know, he's the hunter, he's the go-getter, he's the outdoors, he's a manly man. That's who Esau is. And Jacob is more of a homebody, a thinker, and he's the favorite of mom. And of course, we have different things that take place in the family that cause a lot of tension, right? I mean, Jacob makes a really good sale on one bowl of soup for the older's birthright, which, I mean, that really knocks our soup suppers, you know, start out at $1 a bowl, and, you know, the more soup you eat, the cheaper it gets. But a birthright for a bowl of soup, I mean, that was quite the high price. It must have been some really good soup. And then, of course, Jacob and his mom cheat Esau out of his blessing which causes a huge problem within the family, and Jacob has to flee to Laban for 20 years, where he meets his wives. He only wanted to marry one, but ended up marrying two, and a whole big deal goes down there. So 20 years later, Jacob eventually comes back home to meet Esau, and Esau comes to greet him with 400 men. Needless to say, Jacob was a little bit concerned. But they mostly made up, and they seem to have made peace with each other and went their separate ways. And yet, the nations that come from these two men continue to be at odds with each other. Jacob becomes Israel right there before he meets Esau, right, as he wrestles with the angel of the Lord. And a great nation forms. Eventually, they go down to Egypt for 250 plus years, depending on how you want to do the math there. Jacob and his descendants are down in Egypt, and eventually they come back, and they then settle the Promised Land. But Esau settles down south of the Dead Sea in the mountains, and he becomes the Edomites, the nation of Edom. So over a period of 300 to 550 years, depending on how you want to do your math, Esau's descendants and those 400 men who were with him settle this kingdom. When Israel comes out of slavery, when they come down Edom's land, down their highway, and they say, we'll buy your water, we'll buy food, all we want to do is pass through your land. Edom says, absolutely not. And Israel has to turn around and find another way. That just is the beginning of the conflict between these two nations. Little is known about the Edomites. They're a warrior people. There was great animosity between them and Israel. They were family in many ways. They were neighbors nationally, and yet there was still this tension. The city known today as Petra is believed to be one of the cities of the Edomites, though it was not their capital city. Their capital city was built high up on one of the plateaus and built up, and it was this impenetrable fortress. But here's the issue with looking at Edom versus the tells of Israel. See, a tell is a mound, natural mound, that a city was built upon with mud brick. And eventually the mud brick would disintegrate and fall down, and they'd build the next city on top of it. So as you dig down, you find the pre-existing civilizations. But when Edom began to dig in and carve into the rock, every successive generation erased the pre-existing generation. So what we see in Petra today is probably the result of the Romans and the Bedouin culture that moved in after them. So it makes it really hard to discover what's going on with the Edomites. Very little is known. And yet, this history of Edom versus Israel is the setting for the book that we're studying today as we study through the minor prophets, or the book of the 12. Obadiah is one of those books that maybe you've read, maybe you haven't. Maybe you read it and you didn't even realize it. It's the shortest book in the Old Testament. It's one chapter long, and because of that, all I have to do is mention the verse, and you will find your location. Obadiah means a servant of the Lord, a servant of Jehovah or of Yahweh. And very little is known about Obadiah. There are 12, at least 12, Obadiahs found within the pages of the Bible. And it is unclear if any of them are the writer of this book. So there's a lot of speculation when it comes to this. And when we add to that the uncertainty of our history books, especially when it comes to the nation of Edom, it becomes even more difficult to nail down exactly to what the prophet is referring. When did this occur? What is the occasion for the writing? It becomes very difficult to figure those things out. The letter of Obadiah, the writing of Obadiah, is the only letter written specifically to a foreign power or foreign nations and not to Israel, and it is the shortest book, like I said before. And it is a judgment against Edom for their actions. But despite the fact that it's the shortest book in the Bible, despite the fact that we just have this small book, it's not light reading. In fact, there is a lot of tension between translators as to how to translate this book, or maybe are they interpreting this book. Normally, I preach out of the ESV, the English Standard Version, and I've been reading and studying out of that since I was in school. Before that, I was in the old NIV. But I've preached out of the American Standard and the New American Standard, and those are very good translations, and the ESV comes from that long line, the King James, the American Standard, the New American Standard, the Revised Standard Version. And it's the Revised Standard Version that really comes into play when we look at the book of Obadiah, because the RSV interprets these things as already have happened. Everything's in the past, or most of it is in the past. And because of that, especially in verses 10 through 14, there's a lot of debate as to should this be in the present tense, in the past tense, in the future tense? What is the tense supposed to be like? Now, I want to be very upfront. I'm not a linguist. I struggle with English. My Greek is there somewhat, and my Hebrew is basically non-existent. I know how to use the tools, but even the tools that I'm using don't allow you to parse out the Hebrew like we do the Greek. So that requires us to go to some old tools of comparing translations. And I would encourage you to do some reading through these different translations, to pick several different versions and read through and highlight the different tenses that the book of Obadiah is written in, and to wrestle through this. And to join us on Wednesday as we discuss this issue. And as we wrestle through the book of Obadiah further on Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. And you can call in, you can video chat in, and you can join that discussion. And you can tell me all the reasons that I'm wrong this morning, which is always a fun thing to do. Now, personally, I found that the American Standard, or the New American Standard, and the Revised Standard provide the best contrast of opinions when it comes to this. The ESV following in the footsteps of its predecessor of the RSV. Now, let's get into the text this morning, because you guys didn't come here for a grammar lesson, so let's get into the text. Obadiah chapter 1, obviously, verse 1 through 4. The vision of Obadiah. Thus says the Lord God concerning Edom, I have heard the report from the Lord, and an envoy has been sent among the nations, saying, Arise, let us go against her for battle. Behold, I will make you small among the nations. You are greatly despised. The arrogance of your heart has deceived you. Those who live in the cleft of the rock and the loftiness of your dwelling place, who say in their heart, Who will bring us down to the earth? And who will build, though you are built high like an eagle, though you are set your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. I love the word picture that God picks here. You know, he says, you're high up in the rock. You're like an eagle who is unconcerned about what's happening beneath you. You're just a predator out there, unconcerned about the things that are going on in this world. I love the word picture that God picks here. But we see very clearly that Obadiah is called to preach against Edom, that he is called to account the actions of Edom. And like I said, we know that this is a warlike people. We know that the Edomites lived high up in the rocks, and that this is very fitting. But we find here the first sin, the first major sin of the Edomites, and that is pride. Right? They're high and exalted. They think they are it. They think they're above the Israelites. They think they're above all people. They don't think they can be brought down. And that pride is going to lead to their downfall. But I think it's one of those things that we need to stop and take note of, because the sin of pride is one that leads to many other sins. It's a sin that causes decay that leads to many other failures. And as we think through the story of Scripture and through the pages of history, we can think of lots of people and lots of beings who fell prey to the pride of sin. We can start with Satan and his great demise, and then with Saul and David and Solomon and Nebuchadnezzar, and on the list goes of great men who got prideful and fell from their positions or caused sin to be in their midst and cause all sorts of problems. And we need to be a people who guard ourselves against pride, and that we take up the position of humility, of meekness. And isn't that what Jesus called us to, especially in the Sermon on the Mount, to be a people of humility, a people of meekness, to not think too highly of ourselves than we ought. And we need to remember that we're never above coming down. We're never so high, never so great that we are above stumbling, above falling. And that goes for us as individuals and for nations around the world and throughout time. Almost every civilization has always come to an end. And I think it's important that we keep that in mind. Now, while we're there, let's go ahead and jump down to verse 5 and 6. God says, "If a thief came to you, if robbers by night, oh, how you will be ruined. Would they not steal only until they had enough? If grape gatherers came to you, would they not leave some gatherers? O Esau will be ransacked, and his hidden treasures searched out." Now, we'll come back to the tense question here in a minute, but let's stick with the second sin that Edom is called out for, and that is for the plundering of Israel. They have plundered, they have come down and taken advantage of the people of Israel. You know, I don't know if you've ever been robbed or if you've ever had somebody go through your stuff. But God uses this as an example. He says, if a robber came to you, he's only going to take what he can carry or what he needs. He's not going to take everything. Only Edom and the Grinch took everything. Right? I mean, he took the tinsel, he took the ham out of the fridge. I mean, he took everything. And that's what Edom did. Edom took everything they could find. They completely cleaned them out. If hungry people came and found a fruit tree or a bush that gave fruit, they wouldn't eat all of it. They would just eat what they needed. But Edom has come and has ransacked, has pillaged the people of Israel. And this is further developed in the verses that follow. They rejoiced at the judgment of God upon Judah and Jerusalem. They rejoiced at Jerusalem falling. They took pleasure in it. And not only did they take pleasure in it, not only did they gloat, not only did they refuse to help, but they joined in the judgment. They joined in the judgment. They took part in it. They cut them off at the roads and turned them back to their enemies. They took captive their own brethren for a prize. That's what Edom is condemned for. What a horrible treatment of their brothers. What a horrible treatment of the Israelites. Now, we'll go back to verses 5 and 6 to look at the tenses question of when this took place in a minute. But in order to set the stage and for order to us to understand what's going on, I believe there's two passages in the book of Obadiah that allow us to sort out this question for us. And that is where the verb tenses stay the same in all the versions. One is in 1 and 2, and one is down in 15 and 16. So let's look at 15 and 16 out of the RSV. "For the day of the Lord is near upon all the nations. As you have done, it shall be done to you, and your deed shall be returned upon your own head. For as you have drunk upon my holy mountain, all the nations round about shall drink and stagger and shall be as though they had not been." I want you to notice the phrases, the terminology that's being used here in the RSV, which I don't think got this right, but this is universal across all the translations. So we can look at the RSV at this point and understand what's going on here. They say that the day of the Lord is near. Right? It's communicating that God's judgment upon Edom is at hand. It's close, but it's not yet been. Right? There is a coming judgment upon the Edomites. There is a coming day of destruction upon Edom. It has not yet come upon them, but they have been committing these sins. We see that very clearly. This is things that they have been doing. Edom has been pillaging. They have been committing these sins for which they are being condemned. Right? So we see both are going on. Now, let's take a step away from the grammar for a moment, because as a dyslexic, it drives me nuts. It's important to note that verse 15, is a hinge point for the book. And it's addressing all the nations. And basically what Obadiah is saying is, as you have done, so it will be done to you. As you have sown, so shall you reap. And I think it's important that we remember that this is universally true of all nations and of all people. What we sow, we shall reap. The wild oats in our past will bear fruit. Right? What we sow, we will reap. And I think it's important that we understand that this is a universal truth. True of us as individuals, and it's true of nations. That what they sow, they will reap. For good or for ill. Now, like I said, I think the RSV and the New American Standard are the ones who kind of struggle in this one. So let's go back to verse 5 and 6, and let's see what the RSV has to say. Notice the tenses here. If the thief came to you, if pillagers by night, how you have been destroyed. Would they not steal only enough for themselves? If grape gatherers came to you, would they not leave gleanings? How Esau has been pillaged and his treasures sought out. So we notice that the RSV is placing these things as already have happened. Basically, according to the RSV, Obadiah walks down to the ruins of Edom and says, you have been pillaged. You have been destroyed. And this is why. That's basically the way that the RSV translates it. Now, we already looked at the New American Standard, but I think that the American Standard cuts a line down the middle that I think really encapsulates what's trying to be communicated here. Verse 5 again. If thieves came to you, if robbers by night, how art thou cut off? Would they not steal only till they had enough? If grape gatherers came to thee, would they not leave some gathering grapes? How are the things of Esau searched out? How are the hidden treasures sought out? Notice the present tense here. When we look at the sins of Edom, when we look at the history of Israel and Edom, there are exactly 5 times that Jerusalem is pillaged that would take place in a time frame that Edom could have been a nation. We'd have to look at all 5 as a possible example of the context of the writing of Obadiah. Right? But there's a settled practice as we look at the history of Edom and Israel. Edom has always been at the throat of Israel. They've always been looking for an opportunity to take advantage. See, I believe that the American Standard shows that this is a long-standing problem between Israel and Edom, not a one-time event. This is a settled practice. And because of that, Obadiah comes to the nation and says, you are going to be judged. The judgment of God is at hand. It's so close, it's basically already happened. That's how sure it is. And it's because of all the sins you have committed and all the sins you will commit. And your enemies are right now plotting your demise. Your friends who eat at your table are already plotting against you. And you will be ruined because you don't even see the deception that is currently taking place in your midst. So for the sins you've already committed and for the sins you will commit, you will be cut off. Because of all those things, you're going to be cut off. Now, if I'm right, this would place the writing of Obadiah more than likely as most scholars believe, when the Philistines and the Arabians around 848 BC attacked and destroyed Jerusalem, found in 2 Chronicles 21, 1 through 17. And then it's looking forward to the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem, in which Edom will once again take these actions and cut off their brethren and turn them around and take advantage of them. Right? So if that's right, then that places the writing of Obadiah as the earliest book of the 12 that's written, as prophesied, meaning that it could have been written by the faithful servant of God who served Ahab when Elijah, see, I told you I had to get all these names right. Elijah came for the showdown at Mount Carmel, right? And you remember Elijah shows himself for the first time in 3 years, and Obadiah is the one who meets him and says, "Why do you hate me so much that you would appear to me? Because as soon as I turn around to tell the king, you're going to be gone, and he's going to have my head." But Elijah says, "No, go and tell the king, it's time to have a showdown. It's time to end this." And it's Obadiah who had hid 100 of the Lord's prophets in 2 caves, 50 in each. So it's possible that it's that Obadiah who was writing the book of Obadiah, making it the oldest of the book of the 12, like I said. But that's all speculation, right? That's all looking at the text and going, well, maybe this will fit, right? And let's get a bigger hammer, right? I mean, who knows? Come on Wednesday night and we'll talk about it. You can study it out and tell me all the reasons and all the things that I've missed. So as we look at the book of Obadiah, what do we do with this thing? What are the applications we can draw from this book? From the rivalry that became a war between brothers? What's the application? Well, I think the first thing that we can do is be humble. Understand the importance of humility. See, both brothers became prideful. Both fought against each other. But if they would have been humble, they would have been kind to one another, realizing that they were not above failure, to apologize heartfeltly, maybe this all wouldn't have happened. The lack of humility caused all these problems, and I think we should take as an example of that we should hold in high regard humility, that we should seek to be a people of humility, a people considering others more important than ourselves. I think we also see the failure of Edom to be fair and just and equitable to their brothers. And because of that, I think we should take from that we need to be a people who are fair and honest, that we're not seeking to take advantage of others, that we're looking for ways to treat others fairly, kindly, respectfully. And that leads me, of course, to my third application, which is to be kind, to be respectful of others, that we should treat others the way we ourselves would like to be treated. Edom failed to be respectful of their brothers. They took advantage of the opportunities given them. And as a result of their pride, as a result of their boy, I can't talk. And now it's gone. They were not fair. That's what I was trying to communicate. Right? So they were prideful, they were not fair to their brothers, and they were not respectful. They were not loving towards them. And I think it's important also for us to remember that if we're honest, we're all related. We all come from Adam and Eve. We all are descended from Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And because of that, we're all family. So when God looks at the conflicts between us, when He looks at the conflicts between countries, He sees the same issue at play. Brothers fighting, sisters at war. And that breaks His heart. And it should break ours as well. So as we go from this place, let us be a people of humility. Let us be a people of kindness, of fairness, treating others as we would want to be treated. And always, if there is any way that we as the body of Christ can assist you in your walk of faith, we invite you to let those needs be known as we stand and sing.